Shalom and welcome back to Old Soul Torah. Last night when we were studying this week's Torah portion and more, some strange connection came up between a very disturbing story at the end of the parsha about a man called the blasphemer or the mekalel. Mekalel means the one who curses. So in the Torah you have a disturbing story about a man who he pronounces the forbidden name of God, meaning a name of God that is reserved only once a year on Yom Kippur from the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest. So this man, in a fit of rage and anger, he invokes the divine name, Yud K Vav K, and then he uses it to curse directly at God. And you have to understand why this story is very disturbing. It's the classic case of blasphemy, and that is because in the Jewish tradition and in the Torah, you see that there's room to wrestle with God. Jacob was one who wrestled with God. We see that even Adam and Eve, the worst they did was they disobeyed God, they hid from God, and Adam got to a point where he even blamed God for you who have given me the woman. He blamed God for giving him Eve, right? So we see there's a lot of tension between man and God, but we've never, ever seen up until this week's Parsha someone who directly uses the divine name he heard at Mount Sinai. He's from the generation of Mount Sinai. He was there for the revelation. He heard the name of God. He witnessed and experienced the revelation. Yet he uses, in a fit of anger and rage, he uses the name in a curse targeted the source, the creator. And then he is tried before Moses and the council. Moses doesn't know what to do with this situation. There's no laws on blasphemy up to that point. So Moses takes the whole matter and he does the right thing, what every rabbi should do, what every leader should do, and take it to an expert, someone who knows more than you. So Moses gives it to God and says, God, whatever you decide as the verdict for this situation, we'll go with it. And God says, execution, capital punishment. This guy crossed a boundary intentionally and publicly, and there has to be boundaries in society. We have to lay down the law, and in this case, capital punishment, and which makes it a very disturbing story. So last night when we were learning this, there was a detail that came up that kind of put a whole twist to the story. So what I want to do with you today is just lead you really quickly through the story itself, raise some questions, give you further information, additional layers of information that makes the story even more puzzling and intriguing, and then connect some dots that are very, very important, because the story wouldn't be in the Torah to begin with unless there was a lesson or something important for us to know. So the disturbing text reads, the section reads, now the son of an Israelite woman whose father was an Egyptian went out amongst the Israelites. Stop here. Okay, what do we know about the mekalel, the cursor? Is that he was half Egyptian, half Israelite, but the father was Egyptian. Why is that relevant for us to know that the father's side was Egyptian? Because that's the side you get your tribal status from, is through the father. So he went out amongst the Israelites, and a fight broke out in the camp between him and another Israelite man. So what we know is that we don't know why he went into the camp, but we know that a fight broke out. Something happened between them. So the son of the mekalel, the son of the Israelite woman, pronounces the divine name in blasphemy, as we already explained, and he was brought to Moses. His mother's name, and all of a sudden his mother's name is introduced, Shlomit bat Dibri. She's from the tribe of Dan, and he was placed in custody until the decision of the Lord should be made clear to them. Verse 13, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the blasphemer, the mekalel, outside the camp. All those who heard him shall lay their hands on his head. This is very strange. This is never done during capital punishment, but we're not sure why it's there. But they lay their hands upon his head, and then the entire assembly shall stone him. So a little more information on the fight. Why did the fight break out? Well, it says that the mekalel was going from camp to camp looking for a place that would take him. What's the issue? That his father wasn't a Hebrew Israelite and didn't have any kind of tribal affiliation. And so the mekalel was going from camp to camp to see that, he was looking for a place to belong. And each person said, listen, if you don't have a father, technically you're going to hit a bureaucratic wall. I don't think there's any way around this at this point, but maybe you should go to your mother's tribe. So the mother, Shlomi, was part of the tribe of Dan. And so the mekalel, the blasphemer, went to the tribe of Dan, and they said, let us see your paperwork. Let us see, in today's terminology, let us see your credentials. How do you qualify to be in the camp of Dan? And he says, my mother is from the camp of Dan. And they said, sorry, according to the laws of Moses, it's through the father. And so you may not set up camp here. And he got angry and he got disturbed. And they're like, who was your father anyways? And he says, well, I never was raised with my father. He died when I was very young, but he was Egyptian. That's all I know about him. Some of the elders of the tribe began to recognize the mekalel, and they approached him and they told him what the true story about his father was. His father was the Egyptian that Moses had killed. Let's turn to the book of Exodus for a rebriefing of that. And it came to pass in those days when Moses had grown up, that he went out to his brothers and looked upon their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he turned this way and that way and saw that there was no man around. So he struck the Egyptian and hid his corpse in the sand. Him. And now he finds out that the leader of the nation he's been in, the leader of Israel, Moses, was the one who murdered his father. So what do you do with that kind of information? What do you do with that kind of information? But it gets even worse, because then he starts connecting the dots and realizes that, and we don't know exactly how he came to this conclusion, but he realizes what actually happened and why Moses killed his father. And Moses killed his father because his father was not just a sadistic person who was beating a Hebrew slave to death, but also he finds out about his father that his father was a rapist, and that he was not born with intention. There was no purpose for him being brought into this world. He was a mere accident. He was a mistake. He was the result of an act of violation, an act of violence, and he was the product of a curse. Do you understand what's going on here? He's been cursed on all levels, and there was nothing that he did to deserve it. He didn't do anything to earn this status. But with all the information that he was given, that he's the child of a rapist, that Moses was the murderer of his father, and that there's no tribe and nobody in the world at that point who could see him, who could hear him, who could reach out to him, to comfort him, he was basically at his end.
When darkness becomes overbearing, when one has no root, no belonging, no light, no will, the soul may rebel not out of evil, but out of emotional exhaustion.
The question then becomes, why did Moses kill his father? Aside from the fact that what he witnessed, the violence between the Egyptian taskmaster and the Hebrew slave, the question is, why was the Egyptian beating the slave so hard? And who was the slave that the Egyptian killed? And this is where it gets very interesting. The Egyptian was killing basically the husband, the real Israelite husband of the Israelite woman he raped. He wanted to just basically get rid of him. With all this information presented, the person was left with nothing inside. The mekalel was left with nothing inside except having been introduced to the idea that he was the embodiment of a curse. He was a thorn to the side of humanity, and he had nothing left inside of him but curses. There was nothing else. There's no rehabilitation at this point. At least this is what he believed. He was at his end. And so, one of these students in this class last night said maybe it was suicide at this point. Maybe when he cursed the name of God, he was looking to die because there was nothing left. But this is where it gets interesting. And there's another layer here of information that makes us look even deeper. And this additional layer of information is that there's too many crazy coincidences or parallels between the mekalel and Moses himself.
So the first clue is in the first word vayetze, which means to depart. There came out, or he came out, or he went out. It implies a departure, and the reason that this attracted the attention of the sages of Israel is because it doesn't really belong there, this word, unless it's hinting at something. Why does it say he went out when you go a few lines down to the fight, and it says a fight broke out in the camp? So if the fight broke out, the incident took place in the camp, where was this man going out from? And why is that word there in the Torah? It's not a word that is used often. It's only 3 times in the Torah. When Jacob escapes Esav, he goes out. There's a departure from his family. And also there's a second incident that draws the connection, the parallel to Moses. The second time this word is used is in reference to Moses himself, when Moses was grown up, that he went out. Vayetze, there it is again, that word. Moses grew up. Why did he go out? Seeking his brethren, seeking his family, his brothers. Who else went seeking his brothers? The mekalel, the blasphemer, went seeking a place to belong.
What else does the mekalel and Moshe have in common? They have a few things in common. For one thing, they both have that mix between Egyptian and Israelite. Moses, born from an Israelite woman, Hebrew, slave, but was raised by Egyptians in an Egyptian household, in Egyptian culture, Egyptian language, right? He was even named, the name Moshe was given to him by his Egyptian mother. And when he came to approach the Israelites, they also were not fond of him. Who are you? Who sent you? And even later, his own cousin, Korah, his own cousin, challenged him. Said, you grew up in Egyptian culture and all of a sudden God speaks to you? You're not one of us. At least we grew up Hebrew. You grew up Egyptian. Who are you to put yourself above everybody else? So after Moses killed the Egyptian, the next day he saw Hebrews fighting. He tried to break them up, and they said, who are you to put yourself above all of us? Who appointed you? So basically Moses was rejected by his own people, and the mekalel was rejected by his own people. And at that point, when you face rejection, that's the crossroads, what you're going to do with that pain. What you're going to do. Are you going to translate that pain into purpose or translate the pain into defeat?
Let's take a moment and compare the two and their responses to what they perceive as injustice. Moshe, after killing the Egyptian, he flees to Midian. He goes into exile, but his exile becomes a place of spiritual awakening. This is when he hears the divine voice from the bush. So in a sense, Moshe turns his rejection and exile into encounter. And mekalel, after being excluded, lashes out in curses. He turns his rejection into rebellion and ultimately self-sabotage.
And both of them, both the mekalel and Moses, now are given a mission. They're given a mission of a choice of how to use their speech, their words. When Hashem first approached Moshe at the burning bush, Moses says, but I am not a man of words. Yet, ironically, there is nobody who has impacted humanity and the planet with the words of instruction that Moses gave. Mosaic law transformed the entire planet. For a man who didn't believe he had the gift of speech and words, his words transformed, his teachings, his lessons, and guidance transformed humanity in a way that no other leader, no other prophet has. There is no other tradition in the world that has their leader, their rabbi, their Messiah, whatever it might be, with that amount of body of knowledge. Nothing compares to what Moses taught, yet he wasn't a man of words. But when it came to speech, he used it in the right way to uplift humanity. Whereas the other person facing the same tragedy, the same pain, the same mixed and unfortunate past, right? He took that pain and he used it towards blasphemy. Not to bless, but to curse. And that is really the lesson, I believe, of this story, is when you face roadblocks, when you hit walls in your life, when you encounter rejection or suffering or trauma, what are you going to do with the pain?
So what's a deeper message that we can take away from this? Well, both Moshe and the mekalel are born of fracture. Neither fit cleanly into their world, but the Torah shows that fracture can become the very vessel for revelation or for desecration.
So here's this interesting idea that the way we look at ourselves, the way what we identify with, will either make us or break us. So when heaven looks at us, when we are seen through the eyes of heaven, what they don't look at is what kind of problems we faced, what kind of tragedies or pain we've suffered on earth, because it's known that earth is going to be a challenging place. That's the whole reason you're coming here, is to be challenged and to grow and to transform. So heaven looks not at what happened to you in terms of what brought the wounds, but rather what did you do with the wounds? What was your reaction to all the obstacles and challenges thrown at you? And the more you're able to overcome it, the more your soul shines. The original word for before we had Israelite, we had Hebrew. Hebrew comes from the word Ivri. Ivri means the one la'avor, the one who passes over, the one who overcomes. We look at the word Israel, Jacob wrestling with God and with humanity, and is then given the name, upgraded to Israel. Because that is who we are. We are judged by how we respond to the pain. And that's how heaven sees us. Unfortunately, on earth, we look at the opposite, and that's where the trouble starts. On earth, we look at the pain. We looked at how we might have been victimized, and that becomes our life story. That becomes the sickness, the tape replaying itself in our heads day and night about what happened to us and what could have happened, what should have happened, and essentially how you became a victim. And if that's the way you see yourself, that's not Hebrew. That's not Torah. That's not Bible. Think about all of Jewish history. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors on one side, and on father's side, they were also thrown out of Iraq. All of them systematically persecuted, robbed of all of their belongings, and thrown into the desert. At least that was better than the gas chambers and the ovens of Europe. But not for a second did my grandparents, my parents, or myself, not for a second do we dare to identify as the victim, because if we did, we'd go around life cursing, and we wouldn't stop cursing. So friends, that's the ultimate lesson of this story. The story wouldn't be in the Torah unless it has something to teach us. And all these interesting parallels with Moses, the essence, the storyline is, what are you going to do with tragedy? And your response makes everything in the world, makes a difference between heaven and hell. Your response makes a difference between blessing and curse. Whether you thrive or you're digging yourself a ditch for yourself that you can never crawl out of. So friends, Hashem should bless us that we should continue with walking in his ways, humbly, modestly, lovingly, and seeking righteousness and justice, and to fortify ourselves with the lessons of the Torah, with the tefillot, the prayers, the prayers are of our mothers and fathers and grandparents. And may we continue to face life, no matter what challenges, like a lion of Judah, with strength, because heaven is rooting for our success every moment of every step of the way. God bless. Shabbat Shalom.